Hi everybody, my name's Julia from Bobbins and Buttons. My business and my channel are all about helping people make clothes that they love. In this video I'm going to do a tutorial to show you how to do a full bust adjustment on the Jayne dress, which is the dress that I'm wearing. So the Jayne dress is one of my most popular patterns and it's a very easy dress to make, and it's a actually quite easy dress to fit, but you can get a better fit for a fuller bust by doing a full bust adjustment. So the first thing I'm going to do is just go through how you'd find out if you need a full bust adjustment. So the first thing we're going to do is decide if you actually need a full bust adjustment. So you might already know this from previous experience making clothing, but if you're over a B cup, then there's a chance that you might need to make a full bust adjustment. You might also know from the clothes that you've made or the clothes that you wear, if you get sort of stretch lines in the fabric across this area. So that would also be an indication that it might be a good idea to do a full bust adjustment. So I'm going to talk through the size charts and the measurements in the pattern now. Because the thing about this style of dress is that it is an easy fitting, pull on, very simple pinafore style dress. So it would be easy and it would be okay to make, based on your full bust size, make a garment and it will fit. But what you might find is that you have too much room around under the arms, and you might find that the shoulders are starting to come off your own shoulders, and the neck's a little bit too wide, so it just looks all a little bit too big. So with this particular style, it's designed to be A-line and very sort of loose fitting, but we want it to still fit nicely around the neck and sort of fairly snugly around the upper part of your body. So we've got two sets of measurements inside the pattern. We've got body measurements and we've got garment measurements. So if we start with the body measurements, these are the measurements that the pattern is drafted to fit. So that's our starting point. And because I already know that I'm a bigger busted than a B cup, I'm going to take two sets of measurements. I'm going to take a full bust measurement and a high bust measurement. So let me show you how that looks. So to start with, I'm going to wrap the tape measure around the fullest part of my bust. I want it straight around my back, parallel to the floor, and I'm just going to take that measurement snugly but not too tight, and that's measuring 39. Then I'm going to take the high bust measurement, so a similar place on the back, but this time I'm going to go over my bust, and that is measuring 35.5 inches. So that actually puts me more into the size 10 on the size chart by going from the high bust measurement. So if I was to actually make the 14, the garment would be a lot bigger and baggier here, and it might be sort of, like I said, falling off my shoulders and just feeling a bit big all over. So the other thing I just want to mention is that when I'm taking the measurements, because I'm never going to wear this dress with nothing underneath, I'm going to take the measurements with a t-shirt or light jumper or however I'm going to wear it, just to get the true fit that I actually want. So with a 3.5 inch difference between my high bust and my full bust, I know that I'm going to need to make a full bust adjustment to get the fit that I want. On the whole, a B cup will be drafted for 2 inches of difference, and then it's going to be 1 inch for each cup size after that, so a C would be 3 inches and so on. But I still like to test this by looking at the pattern against my body. So I've actually got the full bust adjustment done on this piece of pattern, but I just want to show you how I check the measurement. So what I do to start with, if this was an unadjusted piece of pattern, is hold the pattern against my side seam. So this is exactly the same dress, so I can feel where that point is. And then I pull the pattern to the front. And basically what you're looking for is how far away it's migrating away from the front the centre front. So in this case I've done about a centimetre bust adjustment on this pattern, and that's how much it was pulling away. So obviously that's going to be 2 centimetres on the full front width because we're working on the mirrored pattern. So that's how I'd check how much you need to put in. But the only true way really is to do a toile after this process and just double check that you're happy with the fit. And we want to make sure that there's no stretched fabric across your front, and that everything's fitting snugly around underneath your arms and you're feeling comfortable wearing it. So I've got the front pieces of the Jayne dress pattern scaled to a very small size so that you can see the whole of the pattern in the camera frame. So I'm going to show you how to do the full bust adjustment on the style that has the seam across the hip line with the pockets inserted in the seam, because it's a slightly more tricky method than the regular one, because you've got to align the pocket pieces again at the bottom. So I thought I'd show you that one in this tutorial, but the same method will work for the other version, and it will also work for lots of other styles as well. So I quickly want to talk about the equipment we need. You'll need a ruler with a right angle. So I like my trusty Pattern Master because it's got curves, it's got all the angles, and it's got seam allowances, so it's great for making patterns. But as long as your ruler has a right angle, you can do pattern alterations with it. Then you'll also need a pair of scissors. It's best to have a pair of scissors that are dedicated to paper, because if you use your fabric scissors for paper, you'll find they get blunt quite quickly. You'll need tape. So I quite like this magic tape because you can peel this off if you make a mistake and it won't rip the paper. But you could also use masking tape or sellotape or brown tape, or even a glue stick would work as well. And then you'll need a pencil, and you want to keep your pencil nice and sharp because you need to keep your lines as accurate as possible with pattern cutting. So keep a pencil sharpener handy if you're going to use a pencil that you can sharpen, or you could use one of the pencils that have got the leads that you put, the mechanical pencils, they're quite good as well. But ideally you'd want quite a hard pencil, so an H, something like that would be good. And then that's all you really need. I just want to say I'm going to use a red biro in this video, just because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing and where the lines are going, so it'll show up a little bit better in the video, but normally I would be using a pencil. So this is the lower front panel, which we don't need at the moment, so we're going to just work on the upper front panel. So to start with, I'm just going to turn the pattern over because it's such a small piece. It's going to be quite difficult to get a good line otherwise. So what I'm going to do to start with is line up my 90-degree line on the ruler with the centre front, and then I want to draw a line just above this pocket piece because I'm going to actually cut that whole piece off. But I want to just make sure I'm clear of all of these markings. I want to keep those visible. So I'm just going to make it just above those markings. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut this pocket off completely. And again, I'm just going to move that to the side. So we're left with this bodice piece now, where we can do the full bust adjustment. So the first thing I'm going to do is put the apex point in. So again, we will have found this out before you start working on the alteration, but just for this example I've put the apex point here. So now I want to draw 3 lines. So the first line is going to be from the hem, which we know is a right angle because we squared it to the centre front. So I can put my right angle line along the base of the pattern and draw directly up to the apex point. And now I want to draw a line that goes through the dart to the apex point, through to the centre, so that's usually where that angled point is at the middle, and then a final line which goes to the armhole. So this is roughly a third of the armhole, but it can just be going into that at any point really. So there's our set of lines ready to do the bust adjustment. So just before I start cutting, I'm just going to put a little mark where the seam allowance is. So as this is just an example, we'll just say the seam allowance is there. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut these lines. So we're going to start by cutting up this first line that we drew. And then I'm going to carry on pivoting at the apex point and cutting to the mark where the seam allowance is. So I'm not actually cutting through the seam allowance. And then I'm going to make the next cut through the dart, and again I'm going to stop just before I get to the end, so we're just leaving a tiny little bit of paper to hold that together. And then lastly, this is quite difficult to do on such a small bit, but I'm going to cut into the seam allowance, so we're just leaving a small hinge at that point. So we've made all the cuts in the pattern now, so we're ready to make our full bust adjustment. So I'm going to bring in a piece of paper now. So I'm going to use this spot and cross paper, which is ideal for patterns and pattern alterations. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stick the pattern to the paper, and you can use these spots and crosses to keep your lines nice and straight as well if you like to, or you can just go by the ruler. So I'm going to stick that. I'll use the crosses and the spots and line those up so that that's nice and straight. So I'm going to stick that to the paper along the front. So this is still free at the moment. So then what we want to do is we want to add in our 1 centimetre adjustment, which is obviously going to look quite huge on this size pattern, but just so that you can see it, we're going to use a 1 centimetre. So what I quite like to do is just to draw 1 centimetre, and again using this ruler, because you've got all the ½ centimetre increments marked for seam allowances, I can lay the 1 centimetre against the front line which we've just taped down, and I can draw 1 centimetre away from that, so it gives me a good even line to line up with in a second. So I'm just going to draw my line there. So that is 1 centimetre away from the line that we've taped down, which is the full bust adjustment that we want to do. So now we need to tape this side down to that line, so you've got an exact 1 centimetre all the way down this gap. So now you can see what's happened. We've put more fullness into the area where the bust is, and our dart has opened up. Where we've got the small hinge there, we've kept the armhole in a smooth curve, and it's just closed a little bit. But we've also got a stagger here between the distance. So we need to just square this up, and we need to sort this dart out. So to square this part to start with, I'm going to continue the centre front line. So I'm going to line the ruler up with the centre front and just keep the line going along that line there. And then I'm going to bring the ruler across again using the right angle and square that, because again we know this is square because we squared the piece off at the start. So I'm just going to fill that in. So this is now correct. So the last thing that we have to do is just to sort this dart out. So what I'm going to do so that we can get to this dart a little bit more easily is cut around our new piece and just leave this area with the paper attached at the moment so that we can work on that piece. So I'm just going to cut along here. And we can just cut behind that because we've still got the shape. This is our main pattern. I like to just tape the back down afterwards, or you can retrace this. So now we've got a bit less paper, we can work on this. So the dart will be pressed down ways, so we want to look at the lines of the size that we're doing. So I've just traced off the smallest size here. I'm just actually going to stick that down to keep that held together, and then we can fold the paper along the line. It's a little bit tricky to do when it's so small. And line that up there. So now if you do quite a bit of pattern cutting and alterations, you might have a tracing wheel which you could just run over that edge and it will perforate the edges, but you can also just go ahead and cut that as long as you're holding that together pretty well. So I'm just going to cut. I can see it's nicely lined up with the seam allowance, and that will give you the shape for your dart. And now we can just cut the armhole away, as long as that's behind there. And there's our pattern piece. So that's the full bust adjustment done, but now we need to attach the piece that we cut off that makes the pocket. So if I bring this pocket piece back in, you can see what's happened. When I align the centre fronts, we've got a big gap at the side, but if I'd done the full bust adjustment right through the pocket bag would have been too big to match with the lower half of the pocket, so they wouldn't have aligned properly. So that's why I've cut it off in the first instance. So I'm going to stick it back together, and I'm going to align the fronts so that the pocket stays in the position it was intended, and then we're going to fill this corner in after I've stuck them back together. So let's just do that. So I'm going to tape the panel back in place. And now I'm just going to bring in a piece of paper to stick this to fill that corner. So let's just start by taping the corner down. Now I'm going to bring the ruler in and follow the side seam just a little bit further along. So I'm just going to take that line further, and then this line is a nice straight line as well, so I can just again match up our 90-degree line and continue that corner. So that now fills this corner, so I can cut that out, and then we need to have a look at it against the lower panel that it will be sewn together with. So I'm just going to cut that out. And there's our adjusted piece. And now when we bring this in, we can match these up, and we can see that when we've stitched that together, we're going to be short of the same amount on the edge of this piece of pattern. So we now need to take this measurement and add that to the side of the lower front panel so that all the pieces align. So all we need to do that is to take our pattern and tape it again. To our piece of paper. And now I'm just going to take this measurement. So that's measuring 1 centimetre. I just like to check it, even though we know we've put a centimetre in there, it sometimes can make a slight difference. So I'm just going to add that 1 centimetre all the way along the side. I'm going to square across the pocket and continue the hem. The hem's slightly curved, but I'm just going to continue that along at the same angle, and then I can cut that out. And there we have our pattern. So you can now, if you want to, retrace the whole thing. If you're going to use the pattern as it is, I tend to just tape the loose bits on the back so that they don't accidentally get ripped or pull apart when you're working with the pattern, if you're going to use it as it is, which I generally do. So there's our pattern ready to go. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial and found it useful. If you've got any further questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. I've got a couple more tutorials coming up based around the Jayne dress. So if you'd like to see those, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.